A good friend of mine was retiring from the Navy and asked if I would build him his shadow box. I of course said yes and asked what he wanted. His only stipulation was that he had a bunch of coins that he wanted in it. I said, let me design you a box that will allow you to always see both sides of your coins. I usually never follow any kind of blueprint or instructions, but since this time it's not for me, I thought I would take a moment to sketch out what I intend to make. My design would be simple enough to showcase all the medals and awards, and an extra space at the bottom of the box would be left open to house his coins so he could add or rearrange at will. I drew a quick sketch to allow me to keep focused, and this would also allow me to get a few measurements before I purchased the wood. Everything that I will use to build this box will come to a total of under $80. I used oak wood, a piece of 4x2 thin plywood, plexiglass, oak stain, and some small screws, all purchased at Home Depot, a foam board purchased at Michael's Arts and Crafts, and a yard of navy blue felt purchased at Hancock Fabrics. After I decided how big I wanted the shadow box, I started by cutting my 4 main sides. The size I decided on is not important, so you should make yours according to how much your retiree wants to put in it, so ask the question early in this process. After all 4 sides were cut, I went to the table saw and cut my 45-degree angles. Make the first piece, and then use it as a guide for the others. Next, I will take the sides to the router. I chose a simple beveled look on the outside of the board for a classy look. Remember, oak is hard wood, so take your time to prevent chipping. Use multiple passes if needed. Don't try to take off too much wood at one time. Repeat this process to all 4 sides. Now lay all your pieces together, and if you need to check that they're square, this would be the best time to do so. Now for this step I will use a dado blade, but if you don't have one, that's okay, you can just make multiple passes. I intend to make my dado a 1/2 inch wide and a 1/4 inch deep. Using the quick reference chart, I picked the blades that I will need. A quick change out of my blade and table insert, and I'm ready to cut my dado. A quick double check to ensure that my backplate is only a 1/4 of an inch thick, and then I will go ahead and set my blades at exactly a 1/4 of an inch. Check to make sure everything is even and that you don't need another pass. Repeat the process with the other side pieces, and remember to keep your bevel up and on the outside of your dado cut. Go ahead and check to make sure you have a flush fit and that you don't need to make any further adjustments. Here I am making a quick measurement of the width of the plexiglass to ensure that the standard saw blade will allow the plexiglass to fit snug in the groove once it's cut. Too much play will allow it to sag. I set the blade to a height of a 1/4 of an inch and center the blade behind the bottom of the beveled cut. When making your cuts, remember you don't need to cut a groove in the bottom piece of your shadow box. This is the part that will house your coin rack. You will, however, need to measure out a cross piece at this time and place your groove cut on it. This piece should have no beveled edges. It should simply be the cross length of your box. When joining your box corners, you can simply nail them together, but to keep a professional look, I intend to use glue and a plate joiner with number 10 biscuits for a high quality bond. I quickly align my pieces and mark them before I make my biscuit cuts. I use a straight board as a guide. Apply your wood glue and insert your biscuits. Snap your pieces together and allow time to set. Remember, do not attach your bottom piece yet. Leave this open until your plexiglass is cut and inserted. While your glue is setting, take the cross piece that you cut earlier and attach it by brads or nail gun near the top of your box, leaving the bottom open. The width of this cut should be even with the top of your box and flush with your dado cut to allow the back plate to cover it completely. Once in place, this will now become the base of your box. Once this is done, you can start framing out your coin rack. I simply cut a thin piece of oak as a back plate and cut small strips to frame out the simple coin rack. As you can see, I used what wood I had left over from the original pieces, so it's not a perfect fit, and that's why I had to frame out to hide the gaps that were caused by the smaller piece. Grab the thickest coin in the collection and ensure you have allowed enough space between your grooves for the coin to fit. Do this before the glue sets. Using a clamp to hold the top piece in place, I take my measurements for the back plate. Simply make your mark and take it to the table saw and cut it. Take your time, make sure you make it straight. Here I needed to remove the fence as it only extends to the 13-inch mark. Once in place, flip over and measure your opening for your foam board. You can cut your foam board with a bandsaw, circular saw, or table saw, whichever you have. Since my table is already up, I will quickly rip it to size. Now my first cut is going to show you a perfect fit. This just means that your measurements are correct, but you actually don't want this. What you need is about 1/8 of an inch gap all the way around the foam board. This is to compensate for the felt that you will be applying. After the felt is on, you will see that the 1/8 of an inch gap will make the foam board fit snugly again. You can cover the foam board and test this fit before application. Simply lay your felt over the opening and push your foam board down through the felt. If it fits snug here, then you're good to go. If not, just adjust your foam board until you get a perfect fit. Before you remove the back plate, make a quick sketch of where the foam board boundaries should be. This will help with alignment when gluing the foam board to the back plate. Now begin your housing for the ensign. Take some quick measurements of the flag you will be displaying in the shadow box. Make your cuts and continue to cut your angles. Once your first piece is cut, as always, use it as a guide so both lengths will be even. This step is optional. Since I did not route the ensign frame, I decided to make a quick design with 2 simple passes of the saw blade. These are less than 1/4 of an inch deep. After your first pass on all 3 pieces, simply adjust the blade slightly to the left or right and repeat the same steps. Now, using the same steps you used earlier to create the relief for the back plate, you will repeat those same steps for the ensign frame. Once those cuts are made, take a measurement of your frame and cut the back plate for the ensign frame. This process should be fairly simple if you are using a board that is square. After your back plate is cut, use it as support when joining the top 2 pieces together. Here I attempted a biscuit joint, but the pieces were not wide enough, so I glued them together and added a few staples for support. Now, going back to your main box, remove the top piece. This should be the only piece not glued in yet. Slide in your plexiglass. I did have to trim 1 inch off the plexiglass, and I did so with the table saw. A bandsaw works just as well. At no time are you to remove the protective plastic from the plexiglass. This will be done later. At this point, you can cut the plexiglass for the ensign frame as well. Once again, I remind you not to remove the protective coating. Make a quick check to make sure everything fits snugly. To make my job easier, I decided to stain the ensign frame before I put it together and installed it on the main box. If you feel the frame needs to be sanded, do it before you start staining. While I let that dry, I did a quick sanding of the main box. The main purpose of this step is to seek out any rough portions of the box and smooth them out. After sanding, be sure to wipe down the box before staining. I used an old sponge and paper towels to stain. This will allow you to spread out your stain evenly. Try to avoid a brush if possible. Once complete, allow ample drying time. For both steps in this process, we will use contact cement. First, apply it to the back plate and secure your foam board to it until it's dry. Next, coat the top of the foam board and apply your felt. You don't need too much cement, and have your felt in position to apply once you get all your glue laid down. It's very important to make sure your hands are free of glue, so if you need to take time to wash your hands before cutting off the excess felt, do it now. Trim off the excess felt and smooth out before allowing to dry. Before I screw in the backplate to the ensign box, I decided to drill pilot holes, so I use a combined pilot hole bit with a countersink. I simply use the screw as a guide to set the countersink depth. Then I drill my holes and set my screws. Going back to the display board, I realized that I cannot staple the felt down, or the slight rise from the staple heads and the width of the felt combined will cause the backplate not to be flush. So I simply trim the excess felt away from the base of the foam board. With the felt all clear, the backplate remains flush with the back of the box. Repeating the steps I used with the ensign box, I drill my countersink holes and apply my screws. After you are sure that you have a correct fit and your backplate is properly mounted, you are going to remove the backplate so you can begin mounting your ensign box to the top of your shadow box. I have decided that I want the ensign box flush with the back of the shadow box. Start by applying some wood glue and clamping the ensign box in place. I tack a few brads to hold the piece in place before I drill my pilot holes for the screws. Once your pilot holes are drilled, go ahead and put in your wood screws. Ensure the length of your screws is not longer than both pieces of the wood combined. For the next step, you will need a sharp X-Acto knife. Simply cut along the perimeter of the plexiglass so you can pull away the protective plastic. Lay the blade on its side in one of the corners and peel up some plastic until you can get enough to grip. I will show you how to do this later. Fold your ensign and place it inside, then seal with the backplate. Before we finish with this stage, we are going to remove the protective plastic from the back of the plexiglass from inside the box. Once the plastic is removed, flip the box over and cut the perimeter of the top of the plexiglass. Now we are going to get the tops of the plexiglass plastic ready to pull. We will not pull them until maybe an hour before prime time. Lay the blade on its side in one of the corners and peel up some plastic until you can get enough to grip. Then take something small, if you can't grip it with your fingers, and pull it up just enough of the corner so you can get a good firm grip on it later. Now, going back to the foam board, you can apply the metals and items that the retiree has given you. This is where you're going to have to use some of your artistic ability and make a decision on what is aesthetically pleasing. The majority of these items have small pins and will push into the foam board and hold securely. For the others, such as the patches and dog tags, I used push pins at angles. Now all you have to do is present it at the ceremony.
The list of duty assignments is there to remind you of the places you have been and the people you've met throughout your career. Also includes many personal awards and the rank insignia that you progressed through as you worked your way up the advancement ladder. Most importantly, enclosed in your shadow box is the folded national ensign, the flag that you have served so faithfully for 29 years.
So the last step is to hang it on your wall, add all your coins, and you're finished. Thanks for watching.